He wants to start thriving, right? And we're very welcoming to babies, but it does make it hard for you to hear. I actually found it quite interesting that it's the third metric, but it has four pillars. We'll get to how that math works out together for an economics master's in economics, but just go over those again for the kids. Those four.
So the four pillars, and each pillar is a section in the book. The first is well-being, because you see, if we sacrifice our health and well-being in the pursuit of success, it really makes no sense. And that's why it's absolutely key to look at what are these essential elements of our well-being. And now, the great thing, the reason I love living at this time, is that modern science is validating ancient wisdom every day. And I have 55 pages of scientific endnotes that show, for example, that something that we've kind of despised in our culture, sleep, is actually incredibly important. It's almost like a miracle drug. If you look at the connection between health, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, our autoimmune system, and sleep, not to mention our mental clarity, the connection to Alzheimer's, is just unbelievable. And yet our culture, and this is something actually that men have to take some responsibility for, but not the men in this room. You are completely exempt. But the other men who created this culture and started basically celebrating people who work 24/7. How often do you hear that in your offices? If anybody says that in my presence, I said, congratulating somebody for working 24/7 is like congratulating them for coming to work drunk.
Didn't you ever wonder, speaking of that, why, I want you to continue, but didn't you ever wonder why, as part of the practice of medicine, interns are forced to work 48 hours? Would you like somebody operating on you who'd worked for 48 hours?
Exactly. Anyway, it makes no sense. And now it's beginning to change. That's what is so wonderful. We are in this moment of transition where medical schools are changing their practices, where companies are changing their practices. We have all over the world, not just here or not just in the United States, everywhere. But to go back to the pillars, so that's well-being. Wisdom. We look around and we see many successful people who are very smart with great degrees making terrible decisions. It's not that they're not smart, they're not wise. And I quote Bill Clinton in the book, and I know you're interviewing him soon, who said that most important mistakes I made in my life I made when I was tired. Right. And definitely I can testify to that. When I look back at my life, when I overreacted, when I took things personally, hired the wrong people, whatever, it was all when I was tired, burnt out. Yeah. And I was with Donna Shalala, who's the University of Miami president, last week, and she said, you cannot lead when you're not rested.
But that's true.
Yeah.
That's
and
true.
She said, because also we always then suddenly have crises in our lives, the unexpected things that happen. So at least then we have reserves to draw on.
So we can't get to wisdom if we're tired.
Well, it's hard to get to the inner wisdom. Yeah. Because we forget that we have inner wisdom, because we're always so buried in our to-do lists and our smartphones that we forget that there is actually a very wise, strong part in us that when we connect to, we are more resilient, wiser,
and how do we connect it? One is to get sleep, but how else do we connect?
To introduce some silence and quiet time in our lives. And I recommend just starting with 5 minutes. I want to make it very manageable for people. And that's why I have, at the end of each of these sections, each of these pillars, I have 3 little steps, 4 sections, 3 steps, 12 steps total, which is not accidental because we are addicted. So we want them in our lives because they give us a glimpse into another reality, another world. Whether you consider yourself spiritual or a believer or not, it doesn't matter. It's what Reid Hoffman, I was speaking at LinkedIn last week, and he's the founder of LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, I consider myself a mystical atheist. He said, I don't believe in God, but I cannot avoid the reality that this is an incredible mystery we're living in the middle of.
Right. The wonder of the world.
The wonder of the world that we don't
world.
fully understand. And so that's the wonder section. And it's actually one of my favorite sections. Well-being has tons of science. It's dedicated to my mother, who was kind of the ultimate giver. And what she taught me is that even when you don't have anything, because I grew up in a one-room apartment in Athens, who really had very little money. I don't say no money because you immediately think of people homeless and in shelters in Africa, but it was very tough. And my mother never made us feel that we were limited by our circumstances. She always made us feel that we were bigger than our circumstances and that we could also find something to give to others. It obviously wasn't money, but it could be something. I remember once she had a little necklace and a woman admired it, a stranger, and my mother gave it to her. And she turned to her and she said, "What can I give you in return?" And my mother said, "It's not a trade, darling. It's an offering."
It's a gift.
It's a gift. You know, it's not a trade, because in our lives we think everything as being a trade. And the other thing that she taught me about giving is that how do we connect with people that we normally take for granted? You know, you come here to buy a book. Do you really connect with the person selling it to you? The cleaning crew in your offices, the barista in the coffee shop. My mother could not have an impersonal connection. She would ask them about themselves. If the FedEx man came to deliver a package, she would bring them into the kitchen and say, "Hey, I just made something, sit down and have something." And it was just, so she lived in this kind of amazing place of connections, of aliveness.
I think you may, I mean, we're going to go into each of these, but let me start with right where you are in giving. You make a point that I think is so worth reinforcing, and that is that generosity is not a function of how much money you have. It's a spirit, it's a place, it's a sense of empathy for others and connecting, right? And I think often people think of generosity, and I don't know what your experience has been, mine has been in life, that I know people with lots of money and little bits of money who are generous, independent of economically. And I know people with lots of money and little who are not.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
have you found that
Totally.
generous is something in you? And everybody can go to that place.
And it's also a shortcut to happiness.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, that the science, again, Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin has done this amazing science about how the fastest way to be happy is through giving, which is completely antithetical to what our culture teaches us.